Hey, everybody. Um, I don't know what I'm doing with this introduction. Michelle's not here. So, welcome to Pax Americana. I'm here with Olga Lab, and I'm Julie Roginski. Welcome to everybody around the world who's watching us and also here in the United States. It's been a crazy couple days here in the United States. Olga, we're also streaming here on Substack and also on YouTube. So thank you to everybody for joining us at all these different platforms. Olga, let's talk Jeffrey Epstein because I feel like there is a big part of the story. I wrote a Substack column about this today, which we can talk a little bit about. But there's a big part of the story that everybody has missed for the most part. We did not miss it. But I feel like the media has just completely missed the boat here, which is effectively that Donald Trump is a compromised president. I mean, there's no other way to put it. These emails show very clearly that he is a problem for our intelligence services. And the reason I say that is because it turns out that Jeffrey Epstein gave the Russians, according to these emails, a tremendous amount of information that he had on Donald Trump. He said that he used to meet regularly with Vitaly Churkin, who used to be the Russian ambassador to the United States. Churkin died in February of 17, but long enough certainly to have seen the rise of Donald Trump.
Quote unquote, died.
Right. His first inauguration. And then, of course, he also wrote a letter, and this is it's just insane because at the time this is all happening, Epstein has already been adjudicated as a sexual predator, and yet he is having email exchanges with everybody. I mean, like nobody thinks this is a big deal. This guy's a pedophile. They're continuing to talk to him, but one of the people he spoke to is there in June 2018. He sent an email to the former Norwegian president and former Nobel Committee chair, I mean, somebody who's not an insignificant character here, named Thorbjorn Jagland. And he wrote to Jagland that if Putin wanted to understand Trump, the Russians should speak to him. And then referencing Sergei Lavrov, who of course is the Russian foreign secretary, Epstein told Jagland, quote, "I think you might suggest to Putin that Lavrov can get insight on him, being Trump, talking to me." And then he added, Vitaly Churkin used to, but he died. And Olga, the best part of this is not that Jagland was like, oh, wow, this is kind of weird that I'm even having this discussion with Jeffrey Epstein. Jagland responded, I'll meet Lavrov's assistant on Monday and we'll suggest. Like, okay. And Epstein wrote back, Churkin was great. He understood Trump after our conversations. So I think there's no doubt here. The president is compromised. And with yesterday's email dump, that's no longer in dispute, Olga. What do you make of all this?
Well, for starters, let's get to Churkin. Churkin knows Trump. He should know Trump actually just as well, if not better than Epstein, because he knows him since the 80s. He actually was part of the group of people who invited Trump to Moscow when he went with Ivana, who at the time Leningrad and Moscow to the Soviet Union for the Trump Tower dangle #1. That was actually their first attempt to dangle Trump Tower. So Churkin knows him for a very long time. It is fascinating, though, that, you know, Epstein is yet another cutout between Trump and the Russians, and that he was providing them, with their information. And I mean, no matter how well the Russians know someone, how much compromise they have on someone, they will still use all the assistance they can to build, a bigger file. One of the people who was very close to Epstein, because he had several Russian girls around him that have all the hallmarks of SVR agents, which are foreign intelligence agents. One of the girls who spent a long time with him, her name was Kira. And interestingly enough, just to show you how these operations, not you, but to show the audience how these operations work, Kira went after this oligarch in Russia, basically accusing him of raping her. And interestingly enough, it was at the same time that Putin was putting pressure on, his inner
And
circle. With him, her name was Kira. Oh.
oh, go
um,
ahead.
Putin was putting pressure on his inner circle prior to the full scale invasion in order for them to basically, cough up money to fund his genocidal invasion he was planning for Ukraine. Obviously, nothing happened to this billionaire inside of Russia, but the Kremlin did send a warning shot by using this Kira, allowing her, accusations to get into every Russian rag magazine. And that's it. So it just shows you how they operate, and that Epstein would have had, information on Trump. I mean, he did hang out with Trump, my God, for 15 plus years from the 80s
Really?
through through
Yeah.
the, at least the mid 2000s. So he knew Trump probably better than every American. Had every American known Trump even 10% of what Epstein knew, I'm hoping that, they wouldn't have elected Trump in 2016. But that just shows you another avenue. Another thing that struck me, and again, this drives me nuts. This is one of the things, especially, that I've dealt with Ukrainian journalists, Russian journalists, and other journalists who work on anti-corruption issues. And I mean, really work for peanuts. I mean, when I tell you they can't pay their rent, and they're sacrificing their life and dealing with death threats, but still have the mission of getting the truth out, of, exposing corruption. His email exchange with Michael Wolff. I mean, here you have access journalism. So even take the Russians out of account. The fact that you have a journalist, I mean, and he had several exchanges with several journalists, but this particular one struck me. You have this journalist who is basically advising him, keep all the dirt on Trump, because that's going to be currency. So not only do you have him advising the Russians on how to blackmail Trump and, how provide them potentially with all the compromise that Epstein knew, but you have a journalist who clearly knows more than the American people on what Trump did with Epstein when it came to him, sex trafficking and raping over 1,000 kids. So you have this happening. And I mean, like, who else has, compromising information on Trump? If Epstein has, and the journalist has, and the Russians have, clearly, I'm sure that the Norwegian official had, since he didn't even raise an eyebrow. And I mean, how many people have this? And then when you get to that question, then I mean, who is he serving? Because it's not clearly the American people. Even in 2017 when he was elected. Now we know, for sure, but even in 2017, he's not serving the American people.
Yeah, what I think is interesting about this, and Michael Wolff, who I agree with you, this is all about, it's not even journalism, it's just access reporting. What I find fascinating about all of this is that Michael Wolff has said that Epstein was terrified of Trump, right? And understandably, Epstein had all these horrible secrets that he was harboring. Here comes somebody with whom he had a massive falling out back in 2004 over a house, ironically named Maison de l'Amitié in Palm Beach, which is French for a house of friendship. Epstein tries to buy it. It's a waterfront mansion in Palm Beach. Trump, that goes to auction because it was in bankruptcy. The previous owner had declared bankruptcy. He tells Trump he really wants to buy this property. Trump buys it out from underneath him for $40-something million. Bids just a little bit more than Epstein does, and then flips it within a few years to a Russian oligarch.
Rybolovlev, which is another Putin insider. I mean, this guy is extremely close to Putin. And I mean, not only was he laundering, money through this, which even his ex-wife said in court proceedings, which is, $100 million. That's quite a hefty chunk to launder. But also the fact that, this was another access point to Trump.
Right. And Rabopov then tries to launder a few $1 billion through artwork, gets taken by his art dealer later on. It's actually an interesting story, which is not separate and apart from this, sort of. But the point is that Trump and Epstein have this massive falling out in 2004. And Epstein, of course, knows that Trump has all this dirt on him. But at this point, what is Trump, right? Like, Trump's a blowhard reality TV star. When Trump starts to run for president, obviously Epstein becomes concerned. And my view of this is, if Michael Wolff is right, and I have no doubt that he is right, because he and Epstein spent a very long time talking to each other while Epstein was, while I guess Wolff was working on this book about Trump, per Wolff's own reporting on this. Epstein understood, I'm sure, that Trump would have the ability to indict him, imprison him, which is exactly what happened in 2019 when Trump's Justice Department did all of that. I would think that if you're Epstein, you need somebody as powerful as Trump to protect you. And you need somebody who's going to be ruthless in holding something over Trump's head to protect you. And I assume he thought the Russians would be those people, and gave the Russians everything he had on Trump, as he basically said he did. And then obviously the Russians could not protect him. Maybe he was disposable at that point because he'd given it all up. Who knows, right? But ultimately, Trump's Justice Department did arrest him after a tremendous amount of reporting by Julie K. Brown and others down in Palm Beach and in Miami. But it's just fascinating to me that you could sort of see how Epstein might have been thinking about this, right? This guy's about to be the most powerful man on earth. Who could keep him in check for me? Who do I need to befriend in order to protect myself? And of course, it's the Russians, which is a great calculus if you're him.
And interestingly enough, again, Epstein has ties to the Russians. I mean, going back again 4 decades. Interestingly enough, I mean, Ghislaine Maxwell, if we want to get into another, the one playing with puppies right now in Club Med, after participating in the rape and being convicted, of over 1,000 kids and grooming kids and participating in it all. Her father, too. I mean, her father, Robert Maxwell, was a KGB asset.
And a Mossad asset.
Sure. And Mossad, and he was extremely close, her father, with Khrushchev, who was head of the KGB at the time, and very close. I mean, he literally could walk in and walk right to Gorbachev's office in the 80s, which, not too many people had that, power. And then Epstein, came on the radar of the Russians post-collapse. I mean, very shortly. It wasn't that long that, Miss Russia ended up floating in his circle in the 90s. I went down the Epstein Russia hole, spent quite a long time there. And literally they were there all over, not only for the compromise and his operation of what he was doing, and how many powerful men were involved in these, crimes of raping kids, but also the fact that he had very close access to MIT, which is, something that for Russia, I mean, since the Soviet days, they've been, have always tried to compromise professors and anyone with access into intelligence, artificial intelligence, technology, anything like that. And as a result, he had several women sent his way, who were basically, like I said, had all the hallmarks of SVR agents. I mean, really, in one case, one was in her late stages of training for foreign ministry, suddenly drops this, and I mean, as a Russian, that if you get into that type of school, and you are, close to graduating and going into foreign ministry services, you don't just drop out. This is extremely hard to get into. You need to have family who will get you there, and 2, I mean, your family will kill you if you drop out. This one dropped out and sent literally pics of herself in lingerie to a modeling magazine. ended up dropping out, becoming a model, straight to went through Europe to lands in New York, straight to Epstein. And she specifically was targeting anything with MIT, to the point that Epstein even, connected her to people with MIT, and made donations on her behalf. They opened like a joint foundation for that. But I mean, there have been so many people. And then also, taking account Churkin, who, by all accounts, I don't think he died. There were there was a lot of chatter in Russian channels at the time of his death, that he potentially was poisoned, after, in New York City, nonetheless. Um, after election, and like after whatever he carried out his role. But then you take into account even like Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who runs the Dossier Center. He came out with a very interesting article, basically saying that Epstein was working with a FSB agent, who graduated. And for people who don't know, FSB is equivalent to our FBI. After the KGB. After the KGB broke up, it divided into SVR, Foreign Intelligence, KGB, Domestic Services, though they do have a counterintelligence department within the FSB. And that Epstein directly was working with an FSB, agent, even to the point that he had asked, according to Khodorkovsky seeing the communications, had asked this FSB guy for help with Leon Black, because he was being blackmailed by yet another girl who was a quote unquote model, who claimed she was being raped by Leon Black. And she actually went on Twitter at the time. I remember when it was unfolding on Twitter, where she decided to come out. And then Leon Black, according to Khodorkovsky's investigation, reached out, in the correspondence he saw, reached out to Epstein, asked him to contact the Russians in order to basically pay her off, to shut her up, which sure enough, she did get paid off and then shut up and then went away. But it just shows you how much there was around Epstein with the Russians. And and the fact that we have a compromised president. And I mean, that's not even speaking now what's happening with UAE pouring billions in crypto into him, and who knows who else owns him. I mean, we don't even know who owns the east wing of the house that was demolished, and the ballroom, because even that, they have people who publicly came forward who are making the donation. And then we have people who choose to be anonymous, and are donating to Trump's, $300 million ballroom. So that's in short.
I mean, look, we're dealing with I don't know that we need to necessarily like belabor this. We're dealing with somebody who's deeply compromised. The Russians have whatever Epstein had on him. You don't have to take our word for it. You don't have to think this is a conspiracy theory. You don't have to go down any rabbit holes. It's all in the emails. And for whatever the hell reason, I don't understand. The media has just not, do they not get what's going on here? Or they don't want to say it? I mean, we talked a little bit about this on the morning show this morning, and somebody said, and they're right, people can't wrap their minds around this because we've never had a president that's been compromised to this extent. Right? The worst thing you could say is, oh, Bill Clinton was cheating on his wife in the Oval Office with an intern. Like, that was pretty bad. And he wanted to cover that up. Nixon wanted to cover up Watergate. This is covering up a child sex ring. And we don't know what we don't know, but the Russians do know. And whatever it is so bad that yesterday, Lauren Boebert, one of the signatories on this discharge petition, was summoned to the White House to meet with Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, and Kash Patel, the FBI director, but she didn't have this meeting at the Justice Department. She didn't have this meeting in the West Wing somewhere. She had it in the Situation Room. Olga, that is the most secure place on earth. What the hell were they telling Lauren Boebert, who is best known for hooking up with her date at a performance of Beetlejuice in Denver, that it required having a meeting in the Situation Room. And my theory is that they told her nothing other than just press her to not do this and to try to impress upon her this is such a serious national security threat. We can't even talk to you about it, that we're doing this in the Situation Room to make you understand how awful this is. But my theory is that Bondi and Patel, either prior to or after, stayed in that meeting without Lauren Boebert and had a discussion that was so sensitive that whatever skiff they have in the Department of Justice was not secure enough. They needed to do it in the Situation Room, the most secure place on earth, the place from which previous presidents managed the Cuban Missile Crisis, the raid on Osama bin Laden's compound, the assassination or the capture, not assassination, the capture of Saddam Hussein, and now Jeffrey Epstein. Why?
And can you imagine that? I mean, can you imagine even the fact that, that Trump is this panicked that he has to use the Situation Room?
He wasn't there.
To plan how to further cover up a pedophile ring where over 1,000 kids were affected. The whole thing is so absurd that we look like a banana republics look more normal than the United States.
I literally wrote a Substack about that today. And I'm not like somebody who's going to tout my Substacks, read it. But my point is, nobody is writing about this. Nobody. Politico mentioned that, yes, there was this email about him trying to turn over information to Lavrov and trying to and having turned information, according to him, to Turkin. And great. No context, no connecting the dots, no questions about why the hell they met in the Situation Room. Caroline Leavitt yesterday at the White House press conference. Yes, Lauren Boebert, we had a meeting in the Situation Room. Not one person at that scrum, not one person at that briefing said, excuse me, Caroline, why in the Situation Room? What merited you meeting with her in the Situation Room? What was discussed that was so deeply sensitive that it required meeting in the safest room in the world? The most secure place in the world that is safest from being bugged, or at least it used to be. God the hell knows what's going on there now. I can only imagine what the Biden administration did when they got back in there to make sure there was nothing in the Situation Room that was not left over from the previous administration. But this is what I'm saying. Like, I just want people to understand what we're talking about here, because this is no longer a theory. This is not. Olga and I, for a year now, have been trying to document Russian election interference, talking about, even before we did our active measures series, talking about how Trump was meeting with all of these Russian diplomats and they invited him in the 80s to Moscow, and Ivana's background. It was, kind of weird that Ivana was traveling back and forth behind the Iron Curtain, bringing her family back and forth. Kind of strange, totally not done back then, as somebody who lived it can attest.
Nope.
And, that sounds suspicious and whatever. Here we have it in black and white. And crickets.
Yeah, this is definitely interesting and dangerous, because again, this is our national security, and people really need to understand, as was the case in the first term and as is the case now, that every action and decision that Trump takes needs to be viewed from a different lens. And this is what I've been doing since the first term. Every time I'm like, who is this benefiting? Because it's not benefiting America's national security. It's not benefiting the American people. And, during the first term, literally 9 out of 10 times, a lot of the foreign policy decisions that were made, and even domestic decisions, and even the fact of turning the United States into some freaking insane banana republic, even then allowing, the distrust well, not allowing, disseminating all the distrust against institutions and everything that Trump did from 2015 since he, um, crawled down that gaudy escalator. Basically, this was benefiting Russia because, you have like at least at that point now, I mean, he's really for sale for everyone because now Russia probably is trying, like, hey, we still in our collapsing economy still have some kind of money to offer you, but then you have, Qatar and other Middle Eastern countries like, oh, that's pennies, we'll give you 10 times more. So right now, I mean, he's really for sale to the whole world. But the first term, a lot of his decisions, if you saw, benefited Russia. All the communications between Trump and Russia were first reported by Russia. And I mean, as someone who, has read Russian news my whole life, this was the first time ever. Usually, if there was any communication between a U.S. official and a Russian official, usually the U.S. immediately put out the readout. And here, during the first term, everything came from Russia, including meetings, including summits. Literally everything was announced by Russia first. And,
And
and that's it. So I mean, the whole thing, it's
listen,
insanity, and it's dangerous for us. And I hope that people wake up, because not only is it absolutely gross and disgusting, and I mean, this is like, you have to be the most morally bankrupt person to cover up a pedophile ring of this many victims. I don't care if it's one victim or 1,000 victims. God knows what he did with this himself personally. Um, and then you have the obviously national security aspect that you have Michael Wolff right now can blackmail him. I mean, a journalist can blackmail him because, he apparently has information, and he's the one who walked around and touted that, Trump had girls sitting on his lap, underage girl, and then when she got up, he had a stain in his pants. That came from a journalist who apparently knows more than the American people when it comes to what Trump did with Epstein.
well, and don't forget, Melania threatened stupidly to sue Michael Wolff, and now he's suing her under the SLAPP laws of New York State for some obscene amount of money, and he's doing it to basically get testimony from her on the record and under oath. But he knows what he knows, right? And what kills me is this is like a national security issue. So if Michael Wolff has something to say, he should come out and say it and not wait for his next book that has bought him a very nice house in the Hamptons and other places. But like, this is for real. And look, we don't have to belabor this. We can move on. But there's one line here that I think just has to be the epitaph for this entire story and presidency. And sorry episode in American history and national history and international history. Here it is. Churkin was great. He understood Trump after our conversation. Epstein wrote. That's all. That's all you need to know. There is nothing else to say.
And I'll make one final comment. Churkin served in the United States since the 80s, since under the Soviet Union. You did not have a post in the UN, not Soviet mission, not Russian mission, unless you were working under intelligence services or intelligence services. I mean, it's just they are a very key post across the globe, and usually these centers, the people who run the centers, the diplomatic post, are intelligence. That's just, fact. So, I mean, it wasn't even just he was talking to Churkin, he was talking to Churkin, who potentially either was KGB and then turned FSB, or, were collaborated. Obviously, you have to collaborate closely if you run a diplomatic post somewhere in the United States or Europe or any other key location that Russia, is interested in.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, this is tragic for a number of reasons.
and insane.
Insane. Um, okay, we should move on because there's other things going on in the world. um, Not so coincidentally, maybe, because why would they do this? We keep asking. Well, I think we're kind of getting to the bottom of why they would. The Trump administration pushed to weaken a Ukraine resolution on Russian occupation at the United Nations. And
Again.
again, now, Trump administration officials are now pressuring the UN to strip language affirming Ukraine's territorial integrity and condemning Russia's occupation from a human rights resolution. They want to recast it as a vague statement on the war on Ukraine. Of course, Europe is up in arms. They're warning this could gut the UN's strongest annual rebuke of Russian aggression. There's new evidence of crimes against humanity emerging from the occupied territories in the east of Ukraine. And yet, here comes Trump pressuring the UN to strip language affirming Ukraine's territorial integrity, which also includes Crimea, by the way. We don't have to belabor this. I think we're getting to the bottom of what this is about.
I do just want to add something to it, because this isn't the first time that Trump did this at the UN. He's done this already a few times during a few votes over the past several months. But the first time that he actually did do it, this alarmed our allies. And I just wrote a Substack on it a few days ago. You have now the UK, who is pulling back information sharing, from the United States. And this is one of our closest allies. Not to mention the Five Eyes intelligence, they're part of it. But I mean, really, all our allies are alarmed. And this all set off again because of Russia. Because in February, I think it was February, Zelensky was invited to the White House, ambushed by Vance, and Trump kicked out of the White House. So here you have a country that's under a genocidal invasion, literally being bombarded day and night by, dozens of missiles and hundreds of drones. How many people have died? This war is going on since 2014. And you have Trump basically kicking out our ally, calling Zelensky the dictator, not Putin, who's made himself, comfortable for 26 years now. Not Putin. Zelensky's a dictator because, he hasn't had elections over the past few years because, I don't know, maybe because it's hard to go and organize elections under missiles falling and drones bombing everything and glide bombs. So, I mean, he called Zelensky a dictator. This really, set off alarms across Europe. I mean, every single European intelligence and military official, they were in just pure shock after Zelensky got kicked out. Then Trump, that wasn't enough. He cut intelligence sharing with Ukraine during a key operation, which interestingly enough gave Russia the capabilities to move forward after being stalled for God knows, a year. And then after that, cut back, obviously, weapons supplies, made these statements. You remember there was also, I believe it was in Canada, a meeting where they were putting together a statement, and Trump said, no, United States is not signing on to anything that includes anything about sovereignty or territory or borders or anything like that. And now he's still doing it again, despite the fact that, he had the summit with Putin in Alaska, rolled out literally a red carpet, had our military people like kneeling on their knees in front of a freaking Russian plane to roll out the red carpet. And then, now he comes out with this, and he got nothing from Russia. What has Russia done? Since the summit, the only thing Russia has done is literally escalate against every single NATO country between drone incursions, plane incursions, spy planes, espionage operations, arson attacks, cyber attacks, you name it. They even tried to, as we've talked a million times, take out the European Commissioner von der Leyen when they
Yeah.
uh, uh, GPS jammed her plane as she was landing in Bulgaria. So, I mean, the only thing that Russia has done is escalate now against NATO to the point that they're scrambling to protect their own. The countries, NATO countries, are scrambling to protect their own sovereignty. At the same time, here we have this statement, and also a few weeks ago, Trump pulled out some U.S. troops from Romania. So again, maybe
Listen,
we ask Epstein or Michael Wolff why is it that Trump loves Russia so much, and exactly what is Russia dangling over Trump's head. Maybe Michael Wolff can answer this for us, since he seems to have very intimate knowledge of Epstein's information on Trump.
yeah. And, he kept saying, this is embarrassing. This is embarrassing. And what's embarrassing is you holding stuff back in order to publish a book rather than telling the American people what they need to know. But of course, that's.
And I'm sorry, just to add one more thing. We've gone over this 10 million times. I mean, the only reason we're doing this is because the media is failing us. And the only reason the media is failing us is because they want access, to the White House and to their sources. And this access journalism is killing American democracy, because, I mean, we shouldn't be in this position. The media should have done a good enough job laying all of this out in 2015, in 2016, again, refreshing people's memories of what Trump 1.0 was like, the insurrection, that is being wiped away and rewritten. And I mean, and this is all because of access journalism. People want, to have their contacts, get invited to posh parties, and get all these scoops, but then at the same time they're destroying democracy.
Right. I mean, I don't think we have to wander anymore. I think we know what's going on, right? And why. And what we're seeing now is our friends in Europe, our former friends in Europe. I apologize to the Brits and to everybody else in NATO and the Five Eyes, because we, the American people, still love, adore you, and want to work with you. It's our government that has just gone completely off the rails, and is evidenced by the fact that Britain, France, and Germany, 3 charter members of NATO — I guess France wasn't a charter NATO, it was, they pulled out, it came back. But Britain joined France and Germany in deploying anti-drone units to Belgium after a surge of unidentified drones shut down flights at Brussels and Liège airports and flew over the port of Antwerp and nearby military sites. Belgian intelligence suspect Russian involvement. I mean, that's a polite way of saying, of course, it's the Russians. With intelligence coinciding with EU talks on channeling frozen Russian assets a euro clear to fund Ukraine. This is not really a new story. It's, the location may be different, but this happens all the time. We remember when drones are flying over Poland basically every day, certainly in the Baltics. They're moving further west now. I mean, Belgium is squarely not in their former sphere of influence, but they don't care anymore.
Nope.
And, what more is there to add to that other than this is what's going on right now in Europe, without our assistance, I might add.
Yeah, and also just to add to that, with our next thing, that not only are these drones, causing a menace to the airports in Belgium, as they are in Sweden, by the way, and Norway, and several countries across
Germany and Poland, right?
Yeah, everywhere. Not only are they causing, this thing of, that the airports have to keep being shut down, whatever, but now in the latest incident in Belgium, these drones have been flying over Belgium's nuclear plant. And this comes as we last week on our show discussed how the Russian drones were flying over, military base where U.S. is believed to store nuclear material. So you have now them directly basically intimidating the Belgians by flying over their nuclear power plant, and now it's going up beyond airports and, everything else to military bases, power plants, and other critical infrastructure.
Um, and yeah, I mean, we keep having this conversation, I feel like every week, because there's a new country every week that they try to come after. And I guess this week it was Belgium. Next week it'll probably be France. So sort of on the same thing here, while we're not doing anything to help our friends, the Belgians, who, by the way, I want to say very quickly, just launched a far-right party named Trump in Belgium. It's a francophone far-right party called Trump. The acronym is Trump, I should say. It stands for Tous Réunis pour l'Union des Mouvements Populistes, if you speak French. That means all
that again.
What?
Can you say that again? That was impressive.
Thank you. Yes, my French is still with me. It helps to have grown up with a French family. It means all reunited for the union of populist movements. So it's a populist front, basically. They really try to pigeonhole the Trump acronym in there, which is why it sounds kind of clunky in English and in French. But nevertheless, they have now called Trump. It's the successor to the National Front and Chez Nous, which means, Chez Nous means our house, no immigrants allowed. Explicitly adopting Trump as its ideological symbol. It was founded by ex-National Front members, including one expelled for Vlaam Belang, which is not a language that I speak. They have several languages in Belgium. That is definitely not French. That's Flemish. For glorifying fascism, the party plans to run in the upcoming federal and 2029 EU elections. The way things are going, they might do well. But right now, Belgium is an ally. And the United States is doing nothing to help them. Again,
supporting its extremism.
5 drones just buzzed a nuclear power plant, hovering for nearly an hour over Belgium's Dole nuclear power plant.
Mm-hmm.
That's on top of the shutdowns at Brussels and Liège airports and sightings over key defense sites. So, of course, this is Russia. Belgian intelligence officials suspect that it's Russia. I think we all know who this is. And Belgium is in the crossfire, and I think it's because it's a small little country that is very disunited, despite what this French Trump party wants to do, which is to reunite everybody for a populist movement. There's a lot of acrimony between the Flemish and the French. And so, I guess that's something that Russia continues to exploit, but we are not helping them. The Brits, the French, and the Germans are deploying anti-drone teams. What we are doing in the meantime, Olga, is we're granting Hungary a 1-year exception from sanctions over Russian oil and gas. Of course we are, because Viktor Orban's in charge, and he's like the ideological godfather for the MAGA movement.
Yep, and a nice puppet for Russia for the past over a decade. I'm going back to this Trump party. Interestingly enough, the only reason I even found out, which I'm so excited and can't wait to dig into this party and really get into the inner workings. The only reason I found out is because every single Russian media outlet was covering this party. So I was like, what in the world is this party? Because Russia is super excited. I don't know if, they have a hand in forming this party, or they just see another target that they will, pursue. But they are the ones. And then when I Googled it, in English, I only found the Political Europe article on it. And I was like, oh, wow. So you have every Russian, TASS, RIA Novosti, Interfax, every single Russian state media outlet reported on this new party. And then for at least on the Western side, you had Political Europe who reported. So at least I knew the Russians, were onto something. They didn't just make it up out of thin air. And that's it. And then as far as Orban, it was honestly embarrassing seeing Orban sitting in the White House last week, Obviously he got this waiver as Trump carries on about every other country who is purchasing Russian oil, which frankly, this is the one thing I'm, with him on, because this has been one of the biggest things over the past, since the full scale invasion, that you still have a lot of Europeans at the same time that they are doing everything to help Ukraine, providing them with weapons, providing them with logistical support. Understanding that every single one of their countries is at risk within the next 5 years, anywhere from 2027 to the earliest assessment of a Russian attack against a NATO country. So they all understand, but at the same time, they've been funding Russia's war machine by purchasing oil. So, I mean, this has really, really been, one of those hypocritical things where you see this happening. But, Trump then goes rails against them. But then when it comes to Orban, oh, sure, no problem. Here you have a year extension. Go ahead, buy as much Russian oil as you need. And Orban, I mean, like you said, he is, the like one of the like celebrities for MAGA when it comes to the far right extremist movements. He's hosted CPAC. I believe Tucker Carlson's father worked for him. Steve Bannon worked for him. I mean, every extremist that you could think of, is involved. By the way, speaking of Steve Bannon, that's the one thing we forgot to mention. How many emails were between Epstein and Steve Bannon? Another one, which is something again to look into, because Steve Bannon puts himself off as this populist and purist and whatnot, and here he is communicating. I mean, way, way, way after Epstein's crimes were known in the 2000s. But yeah, so this is with Orban, and that's it. And I'm hoping that the Hungarian people are, finally coming together, because there have been so many corruption scandals. Because once you work on behalf of Russia and, have, again, are morally bankrupt, you end up hurting the people that you represent. And there have been so many corruption scandals surrounding Orban that it looks like, that potentially his dictatorship might, hopefully, fingers crossed, be coming to an end within the next few years. So we'll see. Something to watch.
Something to watch for sure. And then, Olga, there is a couple, well, if we're going to stay in Europe, our friend Paul Manafort, who we just did a entire very long active measures chapter on a few weeks ago. Chris LaCivita, who of course ran Trump's operation, his campaign last time around, and Tony Fabrizio, who is a pollster. I actually know Tony. I don't know what the hell happened there. Were paid over $1.6 million to advise Albania's Conservative Democratic Party in its failed May elections. You can't help these guys. I mean, Paul Manafort just can't help it. He just can't help it. They work to rebrand Sali Berisha, which is a former Albanian president, who is the former Albanian president sanctioned by the U.S. for corruption, as a Trump-style populist, and later boosted his false claims that the election was stolen. Of course it was. Of course. When you lose an election, of course it's stolen.
Yeah, when it comes to and I think Giuliani was part of this operation too. I have to double check with this. Interestingly enough, what is interesting is that this Albanian former president, Berisha, he post 2022, post the full-scale invasion, was became very anti-Russian. He had his own scandals with Russia, particularly that right around the time of our election in 2016, that Russia was funding his party and money was making way into his political party at the time. After 22, he denounced it, but now this is very interesting, because if he is trying to make a comeback, failed, thank God, and he's using Paul Manafort I mean, everyone in Europe knows Paul Manafort is, an agent of the Kremlin. He's operated for Russia in so many countries, working against U.S. interests, propping up Russian candidates, whether it was in Georgia, Ukraine, Montenegro. I mean, you name it. Wherever Russia needs a fixer, Paul Manafort, carried out a lot of operations over the past 2 decades. So this makes me think, what is happening with Berisha? And is he potentially, taking Russian support? Because Manafort definitely didn't detach himself from Russia. You don't, work for decades and decades for the Kremlin with Russian intelligence services, literally to the point he had, Kalimnik as his sidekick, who was a GRU agent, military intelligence, running around not just in Ukraine, but again in Georgia, in Montenegro, in Kyrgyzstan, wherever Manafort was running operations. Kilimnik was his sidekick, and then of course when it came into United States, Kilimnik, the military intelligence officer, is the one that Manafort handed the voter data, which you say you understand this better than me because I'm not a political person. That internal voting data from the Trump campaign at the
Yep.
time was like handing over gold.
Oh, gold. It wasn't internal voting data. It was modeling, which is gold. I mean, it's if you're on a campaign, you guard that stuff with your life because it's so important. And he turned it over to the Russians. So that's all you need to know about him. One last thing before we go, Olga. This came over the wire in Russian newspapers, in the Moscow Times. I haven't seen this anywhere, and you haven't seen this anywhere, I don't think, in American media or Western media yet,
No.
in English, but we luckily are able to read Russian, so we know this. Russia will begin training Chinese sailors to navigate the Northern Sea Route. They signed a memorandum of understanding, the Russians and the Chinese, to train Chinese soldiers for Arctic operations at Russian maritime universities. This will deepen cooperation on the Northern Sea Route. They agreed to promote the quote unquote sustainable development of the Arctic and the preservation of peace and stability in the region. So, of course, the Arctic is deeply important for a number of reasons, not least of which is national security. Actually, something that the Trump administration seems to understand, which is why they stupidly and inappropriately decided that they wanted to get Greenland away from Denmark and annex it to us, and also Canada. That's what Trump is really interested in Canada for. But now you've got Russia and China cooperating.
And the official story is for the Northern Sea Route, but it makes me suspect
It's for
because
Taiwan, of course.
yeah, that it could be for Taiwan, and that if Russia is now going to be training Chinese soldiers, this is something that we really need to pay attention. Specifically, there have been multiple assessments that Russia might attack and move further into Europe, attacking NATO countries specifically, and at the same time, China jointly might attack Taiwan in order to spread thin, NATO and the West and whatnot. U.S. will be on its own path, sadly. Trump will be killing more bombing more boats, with random people in it. But Europe and Canada and everyone else is taking it seriously. So that's what is something we should keep an eye
on. It's concerning, and it's not like we haven't had to fight a multi-front war before in Europe and in Asia, but this is a multi-front war with nuclear-powered enemies.
And no United States.
And no United States, because we are, not with this regime. I don't think. I mean, we're busy attacking Venezuela. So for all I know, they're going to be attacking Taiwan, the Chinese, the Russians will be attacking Europe, and we'll be attacking South America, because that might be the deal. Just something to consider in this very scary and unsettled time. All right, we have been at this for almost an hour. I have been a little sick, which is why my voice is where it is. My throat is killing me. I need to go get some hot tea. So I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you. If anybody here first of all, thank you to everybody both here on YouTube and also on Substack for watching us. I've been following the comments on both, and we have over 500 people joining us today, which is fantastic. Thank you between the two sites. If you missed this today or want to watch a replay, you can certainly do that on the Mayday Network YouTube channel. And Olga and I'll also be sending this out on Substack. Olga and I'll be back in your inboxes on Monday for another chapter of the Active series. I mean, one day we'll be done with the series, but there's so much about how Trump interfered in the election that we cannot possibly be done with it quickly. We thought we'd be done by Thanksgiving, Olga. We started this in the summer. We were wrong. We were wrong. I don't think we'll be done by Thanksgiving. Maybe by Christmas. And on that note, we will also be back here, or not here. We'll be back on Substack on Active Measures on Tuesday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern, and then right back here on YouTube and also on Substack on Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern for another episode of Pax Americana. Thank you so much to everybody who joined us. We are deeply, deeply grateful to you, and we will see you soon. Thanks so much.
Feel better, and thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.